Hello, everybody. It is Monday at 7 o'clock. And so that is BCCO time, Berkeley Community Chorus and Orchestra. Welcome to this Monday's session online in COVID time. We're more than 2 months into COVID shelter in place. And I'm excited about tonight's session, though, because we're going to be talking about something I really dearly love, French composer Claude Debussy, and how his music has shaken up Western harmonies. And, we say that all the time, but how does he actually do that? And Impressionism, of course, and we have a fantastic soprano as a guest today, Maya Kolrani, who is well known for her Baroque singing. She sings opera, oratorio, sung all around the world. I think she actually made it to pretty far into the Glyndebourne Cup in England, and she's going to be joining us to do some singing some songs. She's well known, of course, for art song as well as bel canto. Now, bel canto, and she'll explain this, I'm sure, too, means beautiful singing. It's a certain style of Italian singing for opera often, which is very florid, very decorative, and oftentimes highlighting the virtuosic characteristics. And so those composers like Donizetti, who wrote Lucia dell'Amour with its famous mad scene, have entire cadenzas that are written for the particular characteristics of the soprano themselves. Very, very high, virtuosic and fast, and melismatic, which means a lot of notes on single syllables. And Baroque music often has that too, so she tends to specialize in that. So we're really excited. And of course, we have Paul joining us for sing-along and some songs, and Julia, who's going to be talking about some art songs, I believe, of Fanny Mendelssohn, who by most accounts was considered to be the more talented of the two, but of course was a different era where Felix was encouraged, and Fanny was not. And so that's one of the tragedies of forgotten eras. Well, not forgotten eras, but different eras. It's going to be, I think, a really fun time. We're just going to wait a few minutes, so I'm just going to talk about random things going on as I've been seeing the trends of COVID-19 time. It seems like things like Netflix added 16 million new subscribers, I believe, and Disney Plus had over 40 or 50 million subscribers. Increase online content. I think Netflix is increasing maybe 100 titles in the next few weeks. But one thing that has been increasing a lot, and that our household has been increasingly interested in, is gardening. And whereas I've always been a fan of gardening, to have the time now is really fantastic. And of course, with young kids, the fascination has always been to take every single seed of everything they eat, like grapefruits or watermelons or pumpkins or whatever, and to save them and plant them. And we made the unfortunate decision not to label where we're planting things. And so now there are mystery plants growing in our planter boxes. And nowadays, technology is just so intriguing because you can take a picture and it will just identify the plant for you. And so I think we have some pumpkins that are growing, in addition to some tomatoes and zucchini and mint, lemon balm, and it's been really a lot of fun. But unfortunately, our backyard is very, very shaded, so a lot of my favorite things like bougainvillea, which are tropical plants, very, very colorful, red oftentimes or purple, they don't actually flower. They're very productive, and they grow vines, and they grow quickly in search of sunlight that they can't receive in our backyard. So, but we've been having a blast. So, okay. Well, it is 7:04, so I am going to get started and talk about one of my favorite composers, Claude Debussy. And we often talk about how we have these various eras of music. We have the Baroque era, which is very florid and based on harpsichords, concertos, forms of music. Even the string quartet was being developed. Haydn with a symphony being developed. And then we have the classical era, which is based on form and cleanliness and streamlined a lot of things that were part of the Baroque era, which was considered to be old-fashioned at the time, obviously. But then when we talk about the Romantic era, we talk about the expanding themes. We talk about this idea of of harmonies being stretched to the limits, and the ideas sort of being grandiose instead of talking about gods like we did in the Baroque era, instead of being clean and sensible in the classical era. Beethoven heralded the Romantic era with themes of heroism, with grand emotions, and Liebestod of Wagner, like love, death, purity of love can only happen in death. We often talk about the harmonies being expanded, but we never really talk about how that happens to be. And I want to do that a little bit about that today. Last week we talked a little bit about chord progressions and how various composers establish a key. And even though Bach wasn't aware necessarily of the harmonic progressions that derive and the theory that we teach all freshman theory, music majors and everything, there is a sort of rules and regulations of harmonies that we generally follow. And so Christian has a diagram of one of these chord progressions that we talk about in theory. And if you don't mind putting that up on the board, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But as we talked about, when we have a key, this will be the harmonic series one with all the Roman numerals. Not the circle of fifths, but the one with all the Roman numerals. This is, as we talked about in a scale degree, if you have a scale, like C major scale, when you have a chord that's built off of a note in that scale, let's say we go in the key of C major on the second note of the scale, which is a D, so it would be D minor. Well, we call that a 2 chord. And if you build the chord off of the third scale degree in E in the key of C, that's the 3 chord. And then we have the 4 chord, we have the 5 chord, 6th chord, 7th chord, and back to the root of the chord. And so composers use this all the time to establish keys and have interesting chord progressions. And when we study Bach's chorales, we sort of develop an idea of how Western harmony should be derived. And there's all these roles that are very much more complicated. And this diagram is actually, that Christian will be putting up in a second, shows some of the complexity of that freshman music majors have to learn and have to be able to play and identify. But like for instance, the piece that I played last week, the Lully Curante, establishes a key of E minor almost immediately. By oscillating between the roots of the chord, the main key, E minor, and what we call the fifth. And the fifth is very, very important. That's something that establishes a key very, very solidly. And you see this all the time. For instance, in Bach's C major prelude. C major, the 2 of the chord, the 5 of the chord, back to the 1. And that's a very, very standard, typical chord progression. And that is the 1 to 2 to 5 to 1 chord progression that you don't need to necessarily know, but it very clearly establishes a key. And there are certain composers that gave into the 5-1 progression so many times, like Beethoven. That's immediately a 1-5-1, and you can hear things like that from the very beginning. So, like in Beethoven's Symphony. And you can hear those progressions over and over again, and sort of the basis of what we have for music theory. We don't actually have a diagram, but it is a really fantastic, complex thing that has a lot of rules. And again, there are certain chord progressions like. There's a reason why. Oh, look at that. There's some diagram, this is sort of the keys and to what the chords might be in certain keys. But there's a whole diagram that says what the rules are from going from one chord to the next. But so when we talk about Debussy, we talk about Impressionist music. We talk about the idea that he sort of destabilizes Western harmony. We don't know quite exactly what that means. Now, Debussy, as you know, is a French composer was very famous for his, quote, impressionistic music, and we know the impressionistic art scene with Monet, Manet, etc. And I think we have a piece of an artwork of theirs, but it is a certain art that it's not like a realist view of a scene where everything is absolutely perfect and precision, but the strokes sort of give an impression as if you're looking through a plate of glass. If you're looking sort of, you get the idea of the work. There's a lot of light, tends to be common subjects, and the colors tend to be much more bright. And, translating that into music seems very, very difficult. How do we actually do that from a theoretical point of view? And so, I think, Christian, we might have oh, that's the chord progression one. Oh, look at that. That's a crazy one. You see this? And so you have rules. You can go from the 3 chord to the 4 chord, but then you can go to the 4 chord to the 1 chord or the 5 chord, or you can interchange the 7 chord and the 5th chord. This is this rule, that diagram that, again, music students of all majors within music have to study and learn and be able to figure out how to progress. And so it's this really crazy thing. But these rules are what were the basis of Western harmonies, starting with Bach. And Debussy sort of smashed it all to pieces. Debussy was a fantastic, obviously, beginning of the 20th century composer, French composer. And many of his works already. If of course, Claire de Lune. I'll stop there. But this is one of the iconic pieces of impressionistic music. And so, like, what does it mean to be impressionist, to create impressionistic music? Because we know, obviously, visually what impressionistic artwork is. But, obviously, the subject matter can be one thing. Impressionists in art were very much enamored with light. And you see the same thing for impressionistic composers like Debussy. Pieces about the sea and the light in the sea. One of the last pieces we're going to listen to is de la l'aube, à midi, sur la mer, which means from dawn until midday on the sea. And of course, things like the moonlight, or the fact that the notes just hang there. But from a harmonic point of view, what does it mean to be impressionistic? And so if impressionism is about creating an impression of a scene, but not having as much direct viewpoint of it, we can do that harmonically too. And the way Debussy does this is by utilizing the whole tone scale / pentatonic scale. Those are two separate things, but they fall in the same category for our purposes. And that is exactly the opposite of those chord progressions that we were just showing you before. Unlike Bach, who spends the first 4 chords establishing a key, we know we are in C major because we are only playing white keys. We have a chord progression that's one of the approved chord progressions, a 1 to a 2 to a 5 to a 1. It very clearly gives us an idea of C major. If we transition to another chord, that would be really jarring at that point, right? Well, what Debussy does is he uses what we call the whole tone scale. And this is a scale that, I don't know if you can see this, is a whole step every single time. C to D to E to F sharp to G sharp to A sharp back to C, right? And so there's a whole step. There's not any half steps whatsoever. Now the interesting thing about a whole step scale is that it doesn't have to start on C. It can actually start in D, and you'll get the same exact thing: D to E to F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, C to D. So is the center of a whole tone chord scale C or D or E, E to F sharp to G sharp to A sharp to C to D to E, or F sharp to G sharp to A sharp to C, D, E, F sharp? It can start on any one of those notes. And as a result, if you use a whole tone scale, you are not locked into a certain key. You destabilize the key center. You are not bound to be any one key center and create that world. You can operate within it. And so even for Clair de Lune, for instance, you have all these chords that are based off of the pentatonic scale and the whole tone scales. And if you, for instance, think about a pentatonic scale, that is like if you were to play all the black keys. And you use that in Eastern harmonies often. And you hear that in Clair de Lune, for instance. You have he's using most of the black keys there. All these notes. And so you still, even though you're very clearly in a certain key, you have sort of an impression that you could shift away from that key quite a bit. So for instance, in the arabesque that many people have played, you have the flat out pentatonic scale right there. You know, it sounds like, again, the Eastern sort of scales. And then if you have, music that is not so ethereal, this is another piece by Debussy called The Suite pour the Piano. It's very much like a toccata. You can feel every single note. He still uses those same harmonies to, again, destabilize the pitch center. You can hear those chords. Actually, those are diminished chords. But when you get to the louder parts, that's already loud enough as it is, but you can hear some of these bombastic chords still have that pentatonic and whole tone scales in it. That whole tone scale sticks out so clearly, even though these chords are really bombastic. He changes the way these harmonies are used and doesn't use that chart that Christian just put up before, that very chart that a lot of music majors spend a lot of time learning. You know, he uses those chords in completely different ways. And so there's two pieces I want to play, one at the piano and then one we're going to listen to a recording of, but that are sort of the highlights, I think, of Debussy's works. And that is, of course, Prélude à l'après-midi d'une faune, The Afternoon of a Faun, the famous symbolist Mallarmé French poem, one of the most famous French poems of all time. And the other one is La Mer, the one that I mentioned before, De l'aube à midi sur la mer, from daybreak into noon on the sea. And so, of course, the Mallarmé poem, as being symbolist, is not necessarily a straight telling of the story. It's not telling of the straight story. Hold on just one second. Hey, guys. It's not telling of a straight story of the faun's activities, but seamlessly transitions between memories versus fantasies versus actions at the moment. And so it seems perfect, actually, for our impressionistic music treatment of it. And so it starts off, as many of you might know, with a single flute playing a single unharmonized melody. Basically just oscillating between a C sharp and a G. And in fact, these two notes, we call them tritone, and they happen to be notes within the whole tone scale. And a tritone is really interesting because it's the two notes that bisect an octave directly. And harmonically, those are very unstable chords. In fact, as I've mentioned probably before, Mozart's wife, Costanza, used to get him out of bed by playing a tritone. She used to play C and F sharp. And that chord used to drive him so nuts because he just wanted to harmonize it too. And so if anything was going to get him out of bed, it was the fact that there was this unrealized, unharmonized, relaxed chord progression. But Debussy takes these two notes, and you don't have any idea of key. You don't have any idea what the harmonies are underneath it. And then you have a little bit of a hint of some key, and then you get this beautiful, beautiful glissando from the harp that again is pentatonic scale. And you can even hear that whole tone scale that's right into the music. But the beautiful part about this is that at very first time you hear this melody, there is no harmony whatsoever. And the second time you hear it, suddenly we start to have a little hint of a melody. So after then we decide to harmonize the first melody under D major. It's absolutely gorgeous. But amazingly, just a few bars later, you have that same melody, and instead of D major 7, you actually have it harmonized completely differently, and completely in a way that's just still sounds completely natural. It's an E major. To C major. It's amazing. The first one was D major, right? To, and the second one is E major to C major. Completely different chords that absolutely harmonically would make no sense. Those music majors would completely fail their theory exams, right? And every single time the chord, the melody comes back, it's harmonized in a completely different way. And so it's the same idea. It's just like, you never have a key center to lock onto. You just have impressions of keys. You have ideas of keys, but the music mimics this idea of impressionism so beautifully. He was really the foremost impressionist composer. A lot of people group Ravel in that same category, but Ravel actually hated that term impressionistic. And composers like Stravinsky, which nobody would consider impressionistic. They consider him, if anything, if there's an art period related to, it might be Cubism, for instance. But he actually had impressionistic music that he wrote, and Ravel, of course, had impressionistic music too, but was also very fluid in style, as people were in the 20th century. And so, Debussy is really, really gorgeous. And really sort of the epitome of what we think of impressionistic ideas in music. Now, the last piece, I'm going to play a little snippet in there where you're just going to actually play one movement of La Mer, which is one of my favorite works. But, it has everything that we've talked about. This idea of light, the idea of shifting tonal centers, using the pentatonic scale, whole tone scales, but also the way the orchestra is used. And because we've been doing piano this entire time, you can hear, of course, these notes that sort of hang or that are sort of muddied within arpeggios and chords and whatnot. But with the orchestra, you get a whole nother dimension to this, because you have this idea that you can have fluttering of strings, that you can have harps just glissandoing through, or that you can have these static chords from the brass that are just hidden behind the orchestral textures. And so, from the very beginning, it starts off almost very lugubrious. Again, this is dark, this is at dusk, this is at the beginning of the day. And he starts immediately off with a pentatonic scale. You can see, this is still the whole tone scale. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And then you can hear these pentatonic scales all over the place again. You're going to hear that from the orchestra. You're going to hear the strings, the woodwinds create this. There's a shimmer on the music. Shimmer on the C. But one of my favorite things is the last chord progression that you're going to hear at the height of the sun shining through the water at noon. And even in this grandiose music, you can hear those pentatonic scales. D major, E major, to D major, to E major. That doesn't make sense harmonically, but he does it, and it sounds absolutely gorgeous. And this chord progression. That G natural. Again, that's a whole tone scale. And so even though we're in the key of, quote, a D flat major here, he still creates, again, this impression. And this grandiose brass, full brass, still has this supple characteristic to it. It's absolutely gorgeous. So we're going to play the La Mer, but note, I didn't tell Christian to do this because I forgot, but the Japanese wave, the artwork, Debussy was highly influenced, not only that, by all things Eastern. And so if you know that wave, then that's something that influenced him greatly for this piece specifically. So we're going to play just the first movement of La Mer, de l'Aube à midi, sur la mer. And you hear for all those things that we just talked about, the harmonies and the orchestration, and of course, this idea of impressionism and focus on light. that's such a great piece. Three movements in that work, and it's absolutely fantastic work. Pierre Monteux premiered it, and I think you just saw Pierre Boulez conducting it. And Pierre Boulez is, of course, one of the most amazing composers, but he was also a fantastic conductor too, and no nonsense, exactly like Pierre Monteux actually. That sort of you had a job to do on the podium and to make sure that the music's match the composer's intention as much as possible. But yes, this is a Japanese wave that Debussy was highly influenced by. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Julia, who's going to talk a little bit about Fanny Mendelssohn, and then we'll have our guest Maya just after Julia.
Okay, hello everybody and happy Monday. No warm up today, but if there is time, I think I still have a round planned so we can sing a little bit together at the very end of my section of the stream today. So yes, as Ming mentioned, we will be talking about Fanny Mendelssohn, who also was known by Fanny Hensel after her marriage. Her dates are 1805 to 1847. So I'm sure we all know Felix Mendelssohn as well, but Fanny was a German composer and pianist of the Romantic era, as her brother was as well. And I know that most of us know about Felix Mendelssohn, but we don't really, if we think about Fanny Mendelssohn or we know about Fanny Mendelssohn, we don't necessarily know one or two of her pieces off the top of our head. But she was still just as competent, or as Ming mentioned, maybe even a little bit more of a more masterful composer, maybe in some senses. But when they were raised together, they shared the same musical education. And so Fanny Mendelssohn, or Fanny Hensel, as I'll refer to her for the rest of this presentation, she was an excellent pianist, and she was also a masterful composer in her own right. So today I want to listen to and talk about her setting of Goethe's poem Wanderlied, which was written in 1837, and it's part of her Opus 1 collection of songs. So we're going to take a listen together, and let's see. I didn't download the video, so I hope that this will come through in a way that's not too choppy or anything. So let me bring this up on the share screen, and then we'll take a listen together. Okay, a very wistful and fun piece. Before moving on and stopping to share my screen, I just want us all to notice this 806 views. Very many of her videos, at least of this song, have this many or fewer views, whereas many songs and pieces that Felix, her brother, wrote has thousands and thousands of views. So I think it's interesting that even to this day, we're still learning about Fanny. Okay, let's talk a little bit now. So If you don't know German, I wonder if as you were listening to that song, as we've done in previous weeks, whether or not you were able to kind of figure out what the song was about. I know that the title is a little bit of a clue, but here's a translation of the poem, of Goethe's poem. So this was found on leader.net. From the mountain to the hills and throughout the valley, something resounds as if on wings. Something is stirring like a song. And to absolute impulse, joy yields, reason yields. And let your striving be for love, and let your life be the deed. Do not stay pinned to the floor. Be fresh and daring, and go on your way, head and arm full of cheerful strength, everywhere we are at home. Wherever the sun delights us, we are free of every care, that we may scatter within it is the reason the world is so huge. This text has a lot of beautiful nature imagery, obviously, and it's also kind of an exact depiction of its title, Wandering Song is the translation. And it's a very powerful poem, and I really don't mean to kind of heighten our sense of ennui as we shelter in place, but maybe we can find some satisfaction in approaching and appreciating works of art like these during this time. So first of all, let's talk about a couple things that are idiomatic to art songs that Fanny also uses in her composition here. So one would be treating the piano less as an accompaniment to the voice and more as a second voice and as a separate agent that can evoke the scene. And then number two is word painting, which we see in also many of the choral masterworks that we learn. And then also it's very idiomatic to the art song genre, I suppose. So first, Hensel, she demonstrates her ability to evoke the scene described in the poetic text of Wanderlied by musically writing in a mountain range into the piano accompaniment. So if you heard at the beginning, there's lots of rising and falling of the piano almost immediately for the introduction. So in just the first two measures, the scene is set. We're in the mountains, there are valleys, it's nature, you can tell already. And it's a very kind of joyful feeling as well, the way that it's written. So not only does it kind of evoke the image based off of sound that the listener can hear, but also physically on the page, it's like a 2-octave leap. So it's jumping between staves, more than a 2-octave leap actually. So it's jumping between staves and you really physically see, like the musician while you're learning this, you see the mountains and the valleys that are created and written on the page. And it also kind of gives you the feeling of wandering around both of those musical staves. And then when the vocalist comes into, they kind of have a wandering vocal line. So you have this idea of just being happy to wander and just be outside. So we see this type of writing, as I mentioned, in so many other art songs. But for example, this kind of like this piano, seeing the piano as not an accompaniment, but as a separate voice. Another really great example of that is really famous and comes to mind is Schubert's El König. So in the very opening of that, you hear the piano playing really fast triplets like da 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 da, and that's supposed to depict the horse running through the night. And it's very like it has a lot of anxiety written into it too. So that's another idea that the piano it's not just there to support the voice, it's there to be another way to really paint the scene. So in the same way, Hensel is using the exact same technique here. So another thing that I mentioned is word painting. So I just want to mention really quickly one idea or one way that she uses word painting in this. So as we know, and as we've talked about in rehearsals, word painting can capture the meaning of the poem through the vocal line on the corresponding text. So Hensel uses word painting on the text, something is stirring like a song. So while the singer is singing through that phrase, she writes a turn over top of it. So you will have heard, like when you listen to it the first time, at the very end of that kind of first section, there was the Sie wie gesungen. So that turn was on the text, talking about like stirring feelings. So it's literally a word painting of exactly what the poem is saying. So another note about the text that comes to mind is, so the original poem is actually 3 stanzas long, but she omitted the second stanza and she only set the first and the third stanza. So that omitted second stanza that we don't hear in the song, it speaks about broken trust and broken bonds and departing to wander on your own as the widow does. And this actually brings to mind the conversation we had about Schicksalslied a few weeks ago, because it shows, I think, Fanny's mastery over her art. So she's not just taking the poem as it stands and writing exactly what she sees, but she's being inspired by it and using what she wants to use to kind of create the story that she's trying to tell. So in the same way with Schicksalslied, where Brahms wasn't omitting text necessarily, but adding on that little orchestral postlude at the end that kind of added additional commentary or reaction to the poem. So not adhering strictly to the poetic text shows her full artistry and her mastery over this project and her mastery as a composer, because she had a very specific idea of how she wanted what she wanted the song to say, and then she drew from the poem to make that happen and to draw this new picture. So I kind of sped through those things because I wanted to talk about one main thing in particular. So I wanted to talk about poetic analysis in this context. So talking about the song through that lens of poetic analysis. When I was in undergrad, I took a texted music class where we discussed kind of starting over from scratch and before even looking at the music, just taking the poem by itself and looking at it the way you think the composer may have, analyzed it before even putting music to it. And I think that looking at things this way kind of opens up a new appreciation for the work. So a couple of things first, let's talk about some terms before we get a little too deep in. So one, like when we talk about very basic poetic analysis, we talk about poetic feet and we talk about meter. So poetic feet, two examples would be the iamb and the trochee. So the iamb should be familiar if you've studied Shakespeare. Shakespeare often writes in iambic pentameter. So the iamb is a combination of an unstressed syllable and a stressed syllable. So we have da-dum, 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 and it feels like a heartbeat. So for example, Shakespeare's iambic pentameter, here's from one of his sonnets, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" If you were to speak that using that iamb kind of poetic foot, you would say, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" So that helps you with the stress of the words and the way that it's written, and it gives it that kind of musical flow, ultimately. So that's the iamb, and then you have the trochee, which is the opposite. So the trochee has the stress on the first syllable and less stress on that, and the weaker stress on the second syllable. So another Shakespeare example would be Macbeth's witches. So we have double, double, toil and trouble, fire, burn, and cauldron, bubble. Strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak. So that's a trochee. And then, so those are the poetic feet, the very basic ones. There are others too, other combinations of different strong and weak stresses. But then let's talk about meter as well. So meter refers to the number of poetic feet that you use in each line. So with Macbeth, for example, again, if we look back at the witches, you have double, one trochee, double, two trochee, toil and third trochee, trouble. Double, double, toil and trouble. So we would call this trochaic tetrameter, tetra meaning four. So that's kind of our crash course in very basic poetic analysis terms. So if we look back at Goethe's Wanderlied with our basic poetic analysis lens, we will see that it's written in trochaic tetrameter. So I'm going to read the first 4 lines with kind of that trochee meter in mind, with trochee, poetic feet. So here we go. Von dem Berge zu dem Hügel niederab das Tag entlang. Da erklingt es wie von Flügeln, da bewegt sich's wie Gesang. One last thing to say about this too, there's also a term called catalexis, which refers to the final syllable of a line that gets dropped to create a pause or a rhyme in a poem. So it's very often found in trochaic poems because it's really difficult to keep a rhyme scheme when you end on an unstressed syllable. So I'm going to say those 4 lines again and point out where the catalexis moment is. So Von dem Berge zu dem Hügel, nieder ab das Tal entlang. That's one moment. Then da erklingt es wie von Flügeln, da bewegt sich's wie Gesang. So it happens on the second line and the fourth line where you have that dropped syllable. So with that in mind, let's look at how Hensel set the text. She very well could have just taken this poem, maybe speaking it in this kind of robotic way, and she could have set it in this, like, musical meter allows for that to happen. So she could have set it with all of these very specific von dem Berge zu dem Hügel to really emphasize each of those words if she wanted to, but instead she gives the first two words on a 16th note pickups, so they happen really fast. So if I were to say the first line in the rhythm that she writes it in, von dem Berge zu dem Hügel. So it kind of helps the listener and then musicians kind of flow through and really show you exactly where she thought the most important words of the poem was. But I mean, similar when you think about like musical meter, like we have strong and weak beats in a measure too. So again, she could have done strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak if she really wanted to, but that's not the way that that's not the way that she imagined this poem and the way that it should flow. So also similarly, removing the stress from opening words of some of the following lines as well helps build momentum through the phrase towards descriptive words. So for example, on the third line of that, of the section that we're looking at, we have da klingt es wie von Flügeln, which is in the very robotic sense, but the way that she sets it, da klingt es wie von Flügeln. So it really leads you forward into the most important word of that phrase, which is Flügeln, which means to, as if on wings. So she's talking about wings. And I think very often when musicians look at music, we do look at these kinds of things. Like we think about what are the most important words of the phrase, and what should we be phrasing to, what we should be like tapering off of, and that kind of thing. And what is this song about? What is the poem about? But I think kind of coming down to this detail like this, it gives you a kind of an appreciation of maybe like her process. I mean, she might not have thought, oh, we're in trochaic tetrameter and I'm not going to set it like that. She might not have thought in those terms necessarily. But I think it's really interesting to look at it on this very kind of very detail-oriented attention. And it helps you realize what the descriptive words are and what are the important words of each phrase. Yeah, so that's kind of my talk about that piece. I think since it's such a short song, we can maybe listen to the very first verse one more time so you can listen through and think about the things that we just talked about. And then we'll have time to sing around, I believe, a very short one. So let me share my screen one more time. And I hope that the quality was okay when I shared this via the internet and not a downloaded file. So let's just listen. Oops, if I can play this back. Listen to the piano as a separate voice. Listen for the way that she phrases the poem, and some of those, the text painting that we talked about as well. Okay, we'll stop there just because that's the end of the first stanza. Yeah, so that's my little presentation on Fanny and one of her, Fanny Mendelssohn or Fanny Hensel, and one of her art songs. So unless we can go on and sing around maybe if there's time.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, great. So this round that I picked out, this week. Sorry that we're going to sing this without a warm-up. It'll be fine. It's going to be great. I was inspired by the alto section, who chose to sing this in a happy hour they had this weekend. So we're going to sing this together. I will say that because everything is a little bit more spaced apart, I can't guarantee that I can play the piano like as I follow. I can follow myself on the piano while I sing. So we're just going to try and do this, and I think that this is a familiar round to most of us, so you might not need me to play the piano anyways. But let's just sing through this once all the way together, and then I'll start off and then you can follow me, and we'll do it like twice through with a round. Okay, so here we go. Let me turn this up a little bit. Okay, here we go. 1 and Dona nobis pacem, pacem. Dona nobis 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 pacem. Sorry for that musical error on the piano. So now we'll go ahead. I'll start at the top, and then when it's your turn to come in, sing in a round and in harmony with me. So here we go. Dona nobis pacem, pacem. Dona nobis 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 pacem, pacem. Dona nobis 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 pacem. And I'll play along with you for the last one. Dona nobis pacem. Okay, so that was our round. I will pass it back to Ming so that he can introduce our special guest for this evening.
Hello, I am so excited. Thank you, first of all, Julia. That's one of my favorite rounds. It's a lot of fun to sing, especially when you have 4 parts. And so someday we'll get back there. But I'm really excited to introduce Maya Karani, who is a phenomenal soprano that has sung all over the world and is now, like all of us, trapped in homes. But she's sang, I think she actually just placed really high at the Glyndebourne Cup, as I mentioned, in England. She was singing in Provence, I think, Aix-en-Provence. Has sang in Canada, all over the U.S., all over in various organizations throughout the Bay Area too. So some of you might know her from that, but we're really excited to welcome her. So welcome, Maya.
Hi, thank you, Ming. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your rehearsal tonight. I'm so glad that we can get together in this way. All of us are going nuts in our houses now. So I've roped in my husband to play the piano for me today, and So this is
Hi there.
Zafir, and on very short notice. So very thankful to him for joining us so that we can actually make some music live, because as you guys have probably tried, the singing along with these pre-recorded tracks makes me crazy. So, okay, let me just make sure that my sound is working well. Okay, if you want to back it up just a notch. Okay, so let me just make sure that the mic is not going to blow out here. So I have 3 pieces for you guys tonight. The first is Achilles from Die Zauberflöte by Mozart. I'm sure many of you know this piece. Just to give a little bit of background if you aren't familiar, this is Paulina's aria. She has just seen, she's heard Tenno's flute. She comes to see him and, basically you talk to him, and he's taken a vow of silence unbeknownst to her, and does not reply to her. And so she is very heartbroken that he doesn't seem to reciprocate her feelings in this moment. Sorry, I just want to make sure that the sound is okay. Clicks, interruptions in the sound. If it's still a problem, let me know. I have my external mic set up. Original sound. Let's see. Is this better? Yes? Okay, good. All right. Let me know if I have to repeat anything. But yeah, so we'll get started with Achilles. Let me just figuring out Zoom. I know we're all becoming Zoom aficionados now, but I'm trying my best. Okay, here we go. Okay, so there's that. Hopefully you enjoyed that. And just checking with Christian, the sound is good? Sound is working well? Okay, good. So for the next piece I wanted to sing something sort of fast for you, and I sing a lot of Handel, but I'm not going to make my poor husband play some Handel transposed to 4/15. That would just be really cruel. So I'm going to sing along with a recording of myself, which is very odd, I know, but it's the best we can do. So it's with an orchestra. This aria is called Qual farfalletta. It's from Partenope by Handel. I sang this role a couple of years ago down in San Diego, and it's this great Handelian convoluted plot. And this aria happens at the end of Act 2, I believe. And there's been a lot of he loves her and she loves him and then all, bunch of mix up. But in this aria, it's Partenope. She is sort of musing on the fact that, hey, she used to love, or she loved Arsace before. Not important. But she muses on the fact that Armindo, this sweet man, had been very genuine to her this whole time. And, he's shown his affections very sweetly. And so, maybe he might win her affections. Okay, so this is Qual farfalletta from Partenope. And again, I'm singing with a recording of myself, so you're going to hear two of me, which is odd, but we do what we can in quarantine. I hope you enjoyed that. A little bit odd to sing with myself because I've made some different choices tonight than I did that night, but you know, that's why we're all artists. So the last piece that we are going to present to you is Prendi per me sei libero from Donizetti's L'Elisir d'Amore. And throughout this is Adina's aria. And throughout this whole opera, she has been playing very hard to get with Nemorino. And finally, Nemorino says, I'm going to go, since you don't love me, I'm going to go join the army. And Adina owns a farm and she's quite wealthy. And so she, at the very end, decides to buy Nemorino's papers, his commission. And she tells him, take it, prendi. You don't have to go to war because everybody here loves you. Everyone meaning her. Finally, she admits it to herself and to Nemorino that she's actually fallen in love with Nemorino. And so we're just going to do the cavatina for you. And let me just get a sip of some tea here. And this is, of course, one of the most famous operas and very beautiful aria. So, are you ready? Okay. Yay!
That was fantastic.
Thank you.
And thanks for the great accompaniment too.
Thank you,
Thank
Zaf.
you.
Now he's gonna go back to work. Silicon Valley, am I right?
Luckily, yeah, exactly. So like, this is my wife. It's just like they're actually still working and everything. That's great.
I know.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
What I
Thank
love about
you.
these is the complete variety in them. And I always thought you to be one of the more versatile singers. Is there a certain area that you really enjoy working on, or do you like the variety day to day?
I do like the variety, but I do have a special affection for Handel. I just love singing Baroque music in general, but I think if I could, sing Handel every day, I'd be happy. But I have to say that my favorite role ever is Susanna from The Marriage of Figaro, because she's just the smartest and most amazing woman in all of opera, in my opinion. And
Operas of
she's,
all time.
she just runs the show, and I'll never get sick of singing her. So, yeah.
That's one of my favorite operas of all time, and
Yeah.
just the music is just so fantastic. Characters are so well written, and it's just, God, I cannot get enough of that. It was, like one of my first Mozart operas where it's just.
Yeah, it was my first opera ever. I sang Barbarina. It was the first opera I'd ever seen, and it was the one I was in. So yeah, it means a lot to me too.
That's fantastic. So one of the things that is so evident is how agile your voice is, and how easy sort of melismatic passages and the ornaments and all. Do you have tips for singers into how to manage sort of melismatic and very light and effortless singing like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever I have to learn a long melismatic passage, especially true in Handel or in bel canto, I always start slow. So I will. You can't really sing it. I mean, if any of you are two-set violin fans, it's there's the joke about you can't sing it fast until you can sing it slow. Well, anyway, but you can't sing it fast until you can really sing it slow. And what I like to do is just learn it note by note, really, really slow, and I will actually sing it straight tone, so that I hear my larynx and all my muscles get the muscle memory of what those pitches are. Then if it's bel canto, I'll probably vibrate a little bit more through it. And especially in choral singing, when you're doing like a Bach, like a B minor mass or something, you're probably gonna not be super like, ooh. So I think practicing it straight tone is really useful to just get the pitches in your body and your muscle memory, and you can tick up the metronome slowly, gradually, as you build that muscle memory. And the other thing I like to do is take it in sections. So if it's, what's a good one? Like in the Messiah, if I'm learning Rejoice, I will do, I can't play the piano, so please forgive me. And I'll kind of split it up in different places. So like that was every four, but maybe I'll go and that sort of smooths out any of the seams in between notes, because our ear likes to go to the strong beats. But what can happen is in between we undersing, or we don't fully know the notes, and that can throw us off for the rest of the coloratura. So I like to work really slow, really systematic, and break it up into little chunks. There are some people I know that work backwards through a coloratura phrase, which my brain cannot compute. But hey, if that works, go for it. Go for it. I find that to be very difficult.
That's fantastic. It's amazing how much of it is about muscle memory and craft, and like, it's when I remember one piano teacher saying the same thing. It's just like you practice the difficult parts really, really slowly, and then as you get faster, your hands just kind of do it. And
Right.
it made no sense to me. I was just like, your hands just do it. I mean, like you can just go out there, and it's amazing how the muscles just get that incorporated. But you need that slow repetition, to
Yes.
really get it into your system.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing that you just brought up is that once you do have that muscle memory built in, you do have to let it go. If you try to micromanage it when you're doing it fast, it can backfire on you. And I'm sure that's the same with piano as well.
Yeah.
So you build in the muscle memory and then you just let it go. And then when you're singing with a chorus, thinking in those larger structures like 2-bar phrases or something like that to really hear your ensemble with everybody else, I think is really helpful as well.
That's great. And so,
Yeah.
even though we have no clue what's coming up next season, what are some of the things that you are or hope are going to be still in season next year that you're going to be performing?
Well, you know, um, so everything has been canceled for me until, well, that's not true. I'm still scheduled to sing at Notte di Figaro and San Jose in September, but I think they're making the final call June 1st, which
Mm.
I am sure that they're going to postpone. The word on the street is they'll postpone. I was supposed to sing in France this summer at Aix-en-Provence, but it got canceled first, which was really heartbreaking. But the word on the street is that it'll be postponed to 2022, so
Mm.
that's fingers crossed. Um, I was going to sing a Messiah at Boston Baroque, but that's been canceled. But maybe I'll come back in a later season, and they're trying to do some sort of online season, so we'll see what that is. It might be very creative. See, and let's see. I have a creation on the books at Vancouver Symphony in January, so we'll see if we're back by then.
Yeah,
Um,
Creation's a monster
yeah,
too.
yeah. So, fingers crossed, lots of really wonderful pieces on my schedule. I hope they get postponed because I really do love all of them. And
Yeah,
we'll see what happens post pandemic. As this has been such a pleasure because I'm sure everybody just misses performing so much and just,
yeah.
being with other
We
musicians. And
we've been talking about the board about how the 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 most meaningful benefit of the choral singing that we have is to be part of the ensemble and to be feel like you're incorporated in the ensemble. And that's the thing that's the most difficult thing to replicate, right? Because even the rounds are the best things that we can do because we can do two voices, but it's that even though the sound goes one way, there's no immediate feedback. And so, I think that's the hardest thing for choral singing because, that's why we do it. I mean, like we have all these endorphins that are like released when we're singing together, and that's the thing that we miss the most.
absolutely.
But we're trying on these Mondays to really develop a sense of community and to maintain connection to the members of BCCO. And as we all know, I mean, choral singing and singing in general with all the air that's breathed in and out is things that we have to be really careful about. But for the meantime, to have guests like Julia with her sessions, and Paul who follows us with a sing along and everything, I think we're trying to maintain a sense of community at least, and
Hmm.
obviously, as they say in therapy and with trauma, this too shall pass. This is not going to last forever, but until then, we can do what we can do. But yeah, thank you so much. This is first of all, Maya and I have
So,
collaborated a few times, right? And it's so much
yeah,
fun because she obviously has the most joyous spirit and the most optimistic and bubbly personality, and so much fun to be around. And your versatility is just absolutely phenomenal. And I know that like just talking about the projects that you have, like all over the place with different types of repertoire, I think it's a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to the next time, hopefully in person, maybe
thank
collaborating.
you, Ming.
But it's been absolutely wonderful having you here. It sounds fantastic, and please give your husband props for playing on the piano. So last,
I told him, I literally told him like hours ago. I was like, hey, can you play for me? So,
how about that
very
handle?
thankful to him. Yeah,
It
yeah.
actually worked out really
Anyway,
well.
thank you so much.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's great. So
Thank you
thanks
very much
again.
for inviting
See
me.
you next time, and we're going to pass it on to Paul, who's going to close out with, of course, our sing along and a song for us, I believe. So,
Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. So, good. A couple weeks ago, we were lucky enough to have Derek Tam on, and God, it was so inspiring to hear the Goldberg variations because they were such a important piece to me as a younger man. Because I used to play Bach almost every day. It was like doing exercise or something. And then last week, Ming was talking about sequences, and specifically in Baroque music. And I thought, there was a piece I used to play that I never got to perform, that it just has these wonderful sequences in it. And I think maybe I can pull that together in a week. This is a piece from Partita. And partitas are suites. You know, Bach wrote French suites, he wrote English suites. And this is another kind of suite called a partita, and it was much freer in form. Where he discarded the prelude, which was a big feature of the English suites, in favor of, you know, in like he has an overture in one, he has a fantasia, he has a toccata in one. And in this one, number 5, the word is preambulum, which means preamble. It's a prelude. And to me, it's one of the most extroverted pieces that Bach ever wrote. And like I said, I worked on it a lot when I was younger and never got the chance to perform it. So here we go tonight, the first performance, by me that is, of the Preambulum from Partita number 5. So here we go. Okay, that was the preamble. Now tonight for our sing-along, we're going to have a very special sing-along. This was suggested by Judy Frickman, who sent us, Julie Frickman, who sent us a wonderful video of Phoenix Chamber Choir singing The Longest Time by Billy Joel, rewritten for COVID-19 times. So I believe Christian has lyrics for you, and Billy Joel is a tenor, certainly, and he sings very high at times. I believe the solo goes up to a G here. So I'm going to have to drop down. I'm really counting on you all to sing out tonight to cover me up a little bit, because as you know, piano is more my thing. But here we go. So we're going to just start like that. I'm going to give you 1, 2, 3, and we'll be in. So 1, 2, 3. What else could I do? in sight. No, I could be wrong. Maybe I've been having too hard, but we've come this far, and the curve's getting flatter. If you choose to venture out today, stay at least 2 meters away. Can take no chances, given certain circumstances. We haven't left it for the longest time. I gathered the thoughts at the start. I said to myself, I will do my part. Reaching hands, not touching my face. I long for your embrace, and it's all that I hope for. It's my job to do all the right things. Social distancing as I sing. I miss you so bad, but I think you ought to know that I intend to stay here for the longest time. Whoa, for the longest time. Whoa, for the longest time. Whoa, for the longest
Oh, Paul, it's one of my favorite songs of all time. I
No
admit,
doubt.
I was singing. Whoa.
Oh, I wish. I wish.
Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Always
everybody.
such fun to end a session with the sing-alongs. It's absolutely fantastic. It's all the spirit of BCCO. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Julia. And we will see you all next week. Thank you all again. Bye.